Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, the Dodgers made a trade yesterday, and I like the trade. Not the way I like my wife, but more like the way I like the sandwich I had for lunch yesterday. You know, it filled a need, it was a reasonable cost, and it was pretty good. So I'm going to talk about what Miguel Rojas brings to the team, what his acquisition does to the Dodgers' attempts to try to get under the luxury tax, and what the Dodgers are losing in prospect Jacob Amaya, who they sent back to the Marlins. That's what's on tap. So let's get Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Dodger fans, this is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. Or even better, go ahead and subscribe wherever you're watching or listening right now, and then you will never miss a day because you know we're not going to, even though we almost might sometimes. If this is your first time with us, my name is Jeff Snider. My normal co-host is Vince Samperio, although it's just me today. Vince and I are both lifelong Dodger fans, just like you are. We've also both spent time covering the Dodgers in the press box and the locker room. So we're not quite insiders, but we bring you the smart fans perspective on our boys in blue every weekday morning. And with all that out of the way, I want to apologize to all of you that this episode was not in your inboxes, your podcast catcher, your YouTube feed first thing this morning. I recorded this episode twice last night, and just like I always do. And both times the audio came out jumbled. I did it in two different apps. And after the second time, I realized it was probably a problem with my microphone. Luckily, I restarted my computer this morning and ran a test, and it appears that solved the issue. And so hopefully third time's the charm on this episode. If you're seeing this, that means the third time worked. If you're not seeing this, I don't know how to finish that sentence. Anyway, the Dodgers made a big trade, not a huge trade, not even a big trade, a trade on Wednesday. They traded prospect Jacob Amaya to the Marlins for former Dodger Miguel Rojas, who basically the Dodgers traded Rojas to the Marlins 8 years ago, and he was kind of the same player that Amaya is right now, although Rojas had played in the big leagues at that point. Amaya hasn't. But a very similar kind of trade there, except that time Rojas was part of a bigger package. That was the big D. Gordon trade that brought back Kike Hernandez and Austin Barnes and Chris Hatcher and Andrew Heaney for a day before he went to the Angels for Howie Kendrick. It was a big trade, but not because of Miguel Rojas. This time, to the extent that it's a big trade, it's because of Miguel Rojas, because Rojas is, by all accounts, an excellent defensive shortstop. He was a Gold Glove finalist in 2022. He was second in the league in defensive runs scored or defensive runs saved as a shortstop. Just very, very good defensive shortstop. It's interesting, though, that nobody seems to agree on what this means for the Dodgers. Some people think that Miguel Rojas will be slotted in as the starting shortstop for the Dodgers. Other people like Mike DiGiovanna of the LA Times says that the Dodgers' plan for Rojas is to be more of a utility infielder, playing second, third, and short, and maybe even first base once in a while if Freddie Freeman needs an inning off or something. Rojas has played all those positions in the past, and Rojas himself said, talking to David Vassegh last night, he said that he is ready to play wherever the Dodgers need him to. And so I think my best guess right now is that the plan is for Gavin Lux to get a chance to earn the spot as the starting shortstop. And what Rojas brings to the table is he's kind of an insurance policy. The Dodgers have probably plans A through F. You know, they talk a lot about the word optionality, which you might not have even known was a real word, but apparently it is. And what it means is having options. I don't know why they say optionality instead of having options, but and Miguel Rojas brings a lot of optionality because you have guys, Chris Taylor could play center field or left field or second base or shortstop. Gavin Lux could play shortstop or second base. He could even play left field in a pinch. Miguel Vargas can play third base or second base or left field, although we're not sure how well he can play any of those. Max Muncy can play third or second. He can play first too, but they don't need a first baseman. They have a lot of guys who can play multiple different positions, and Rojas adds to that. And what Rojas brings is he can play all of them well. Rojas, Dodger fans still have a soft spot for Miguel Rojas because 9 years ago, he saved Clayton Kershaw's no-hitter just a couple batters after Hanley Ramirez ruined Kershaw's perfect game. Rojas was playing third base at the time, ground ball down the line. He made a great backhanded stab and a throw across the diamond. Adrian Gonzalez made a nice pick at first base and saved Kershaw's no-hitter. And that's what Rojas brings to the team, is great defense. What he doesn't bring is much offense. He is not a very good hitter. He had a 138 OPS plus in 2020 in the shortened season. It was even shorter for him. He only played 40 games, but had a 138 OPS plus. He showed signs of being, maybe this guy can actually hit. Even counting that season, though, his career OPS plus is 85. He simply is not a very good hitter, at least not consistently. Maybe the Dodgers hitting team can help him figure that out. Last year, he was actually hitting better. He injured his wrist in July, and he was actually already in a slump for about 10 games before the wrist injury, but then trying to get out of a slump with an injured right wrist is nearly impossible. So his OPS dropped a lot. He ended up having basically the worst offensive season of his career last year, but he was actually having a decent year. He wouldn't have been great, but he probably would have had an OPS around 93 to 95 based on the first few months of the season. And with his defense, an OPS like that, where he's just barely below league average, would be just fine. If he's at 85 or 68 or whatever he was last year, it's hard to play him every day if you're a team wanting to win the World Series like the Dodgers are. But if he could be in the 90s on OPS plus, with his defense, that's easy to let him play. Still doesn't mean he'd be the starting shortstop. He might bounce around and play multiple positions, but he brings a lot of options to the table, and that's why I like this trade so much. In addition to, he's a veteran, he's a leader, everybody respects him, he works hard, great attitude, all of that stuff. And the Dodgers have shown a willingness in the past to have guys on the roster just for that, even if they didn't bring anything to the table baseball-wise. Hanser Alberto last year stuck around mostly because everybody liked him and he could pitch once in a while. He didn't do anything really for the Dodgers offensively, and defensively he could play multiple positions, but none of them super great. And so he was just a guy, but he stuck around because of that leadership quality. Rojas theoretically could bring that leadership quality and some value on the baseball field. He had 2.5 WAR last year, even despite having his worst offensive season, because he was that good defensively. So a lot of value that Rojas can bring. I'm going to talk about Jacob Amaya in the last segment of this episode, but basically the short version, or at least a spoiler, is the Dodgers didn't give up much for Miguel Rojas. And so I like this trade. I like what it does. One thing that it does do, though, is it puts them even more over the luxury tax than they were. They were kind of hugging that line, and now they are definitely over that line. So I'm going to come back in a minute. I'm going to talk about what this means for the Dodgers and their attempts to get under the luxury tax. So thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning, and please keep it Locked On Dodgers. This episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. Pro and college football, pro and college basketball, baseball season's about to start. Everything you want, we've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, I am back. I want to thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning, although maybe not today because it wasn't ready first thing this morning, but I hope you'll make it your first listen this weekday afternoon. When you're done with this episode, for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. If you are watching this on YouTube, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. If you're listening on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you through social media or email or whatever. I'll give you all the contact info at the end, like I always do. Let's talk, though, about the luxury tax. When an arbitrator reinstated Trevor Bauer last month, he put the Dodgers on the hook for $22.5 million to Bauer this year, which put them right up either just below or just over the luxury tax threshold. And the reason we don't know exactly is because everything's just estimates at this point. The actual luxury tax numbers aren't calculated until after the season because everything counts. And so right now, we don't even know. The Dodgers have 9 or 10 guys eligible for arbitration. We don't even know for sure how much they're going to make. We have estimates on what we think they're going to make. And that's what these numbers are currently based on, is those estimates. But somebody could make $1 million more or $1 million less than is estimated in arbitration. That would affect the luxury tax number. Noah Syndergaard has incentive clauses in his contract based on innings pitched. If he hits those, he makes more money, which all counts against the luxury tax. And so we won't know for sure until after the 2023 season whether the Dodgers were over the luxury tax, but the Dodgers are pretty good at keeping track internally and knowing where they stand. And they were somewhere right near the line. And then they add Rojas, who's getting $5 million this year, which means they are definitely over the line, probably by about $5 million. On a side note, the Dodgers did officially release Trevor Bauer this morning. He's now a free agent. If he does sign with another team, that would drop $720,000 off of the Dodgers luxury tax number, because basically any team that signs him will sign him for the league minimum, $720,000, and the Dodgers will be responsible for the rest of the $22.5 million minus that $720,000. So, whatever that is, $21.78 million. And luxury tax wise, that $720,000 would come off their luxury tax bill. And so, but they'd still be, $4 million over after adding Rojas, which means there's a couple possibilities. Either the Dodgers have decided to give up on getting under the luxury tax this offseason. And they're just going to say, well, whatever, it didn't work out. Sorry about that. It seems like it would be a weird time to make that decision, because if you're going to make that decision, you'd think they'd make the decision back when there were free agents available to sign. And now the free agent market is pretty sparse. There's some guys, but there's not much left there. And so not like they're going to go very far over anyway, at least in the free agent market. I guess it would free them up to maybe consider trades for guys making more money. I don't know. I don't know if that's been holding them back on trades anyway. If they were going to trade for Brian Reynolds, he's making some money, not huge money, but enough that when you're trying to stay under the luxury tax, that matters. Anybody you're bringing in a trade, you're bringing in their salary also. So, giving up on getting under the luxury tax would free them up a little bit. But like I said, the timing doesn't make sense, except for the fact that the Dodgers had no control over when the arbitrator was going to issue his decision on Bauer. And so when that happened, that put them so close to the line that they might already be over it anyway. And so maybe that forced their hand, and maybe they're just going to say, okay, well, we're not getting under. Maybe we'll try again next year. Maybe we won't. If it was just money, I don't think the Dodgers would worry very much about the luxury tax. The challenge is the penalties for going over the luxury tax aren't just financial. There's, for example, Shohei Ohtani is going to be a free agent next year. He's going to get a qualifying offer from the Angels. So whichever team signs Ohtani is going to have penalties for signing a guy who had rejected a qualifying offer. Let's say it's the Dodgers. If the Dodgers are over the luxury tax this year, then their penalty for signing Ohtani next offseason would be losing their 2nd and 5th picks in the draft and losing $1 million in international bonus pool money. If the Dodgers are under the luxury tax this year, signing Ohtani next year, the penalty would be losing their 2nd pick and $500,000 in international bonus pool money. The penalties are almost doubled for teams that were over the luxury tax compared to under. Why does that matter? Because the Dodgers are very good at drafting and developing players. And so losing an extra draft pick is a big deal. losing money to sign international players who they can then develop is a big deal. And that's why the Dodgers owners are billionaires. And people, I see people talking about, why are they being cheapskates? They're rich. Why do they care about the luxury tax? I think it has more to do with building a sustainable, successful franchise, which you need a farm system. The Dodgers have a great farm system, and we're seeing just yesterday they used a guy from that farm system to trade for a need at the big league level right now. We see that all the time. They traded prospects to get Mookie Betts. They traded prospects to get Max Scherzer and Trey Turner. They traded prospects to get Yu Darvish. They traded prospects to get Manny Machado. Over and over, we've seen the Dodgers, in addition to the farm system producing major leaguers like Will Smith and Walker Buehler and Clayton Kershaw and Corey Seager and Gavin Lux and Cody Bellinger and Tony Gonsolin and Dustin May and Julio Urias and on and on and on. In addition to providing big leaguers, it's also provided trade bait to bring in other big leaguers. The Dodgers don't really play in free agency much. Freddie Freeman is really the only big free agent they've brought in the last little while. Otherwise, it's Chris Taylor and Justin Turner and Max Muncy all came as free agents, but they were castaways by their old teams. Noah Syndergaard is their biggest free agent this year, or maybe JD Martinez, one of those guys. Not huge names, huge dollars, and it works for them. And that's because of this farm system. And so, in order to continue building this organization, I think it makes sense for them to get under the luxury tax once in a while, reset those penalties, and especially in a year like this, when a year from now we are going to be pursuing a free agent who we know will have been made a qualifying offer. If we can this offseason, let's get under the luxury tax. So it makes sense for them to try to do it. I still think they're going to try to do that. And that would, at this point, it would have to mean a trade. Blake Treinen is the one that makes the most sense. Vince and I talked about Chris Taylor and Max Muncy the other day, and we mentioned Blake Treinen, but Treinen makes the most sense because he's not going to bring any value to the Dodgers this year. And so, if they were to trade Taylor or Muncy, they're taking away from their current product to get under luxury tax. Trading Treinen, it wouldn't take anything away from their current product. Now you're thinking, why would any team trade for Blake Treinen, who's getting paid $8 million and isn't going to pitch this year? And the answer is prospects. Again, the Dodgers can use their prospect system to make this happen. Say, hey, we will trade you Blake Treinen and one or two solid prospects for a lesser prospect from you. So it's officially a trade of people. But really what they're saying is, hey, we'll give you these two prospects if you pay Blake Treinen's salary for us and get him off our payroll number, our luxury tax number. Teams make those trades. The Dodgers have made those trades the other direction in the past. The big trade with the Reds in December of 2018, when they traded Puig and Kemp and Alex Wood and Kyle Farmer to the Reds, and the Dodgers got back a couple decent prospects. They got Josiah Gray and Jeter Downs, who then they made them even better prospects and flipped them. Jeter Downs was in the Mookie Betts trade. Josiah Gray was in the Max Scherzer and Trey Turner trade. But they got those guys because they were willing to take on Homer Bailey's contract from the Reds. And that's a move that made sense for the Dodgers at the time. Teams make these trades. And so if there's a team that isn't close to luxury tax, has that $8 million of wiggle room, it's basically buying prospects from the Dodgers if they make that trade. That trade will be easier to make once spring training starts, because right now, Blake Treinen is using a 40-man roster spot. And so it wouldn't just be a financial transaction for another team to trade for Treinen right now, because they would have to clear a spot on their 40-man roster to make room for Treinen. Once spring training starts, then the 60-day injured list goes into effect, and they can put Treinen on the 60-day IL, which means at that point he no longer counts towards their 40-man roster limit, and he wouldn't count towards the 40-man roster limit of whatever team he was traded to. So at that point, it is just a financial transaction. They're just buying prospects with no roster implications at all. So I don't expect Treinen to get traded before spring training starts, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if once he's on the 60-day IL, if they swing a trade for that to make that work. And the Dodgers will have 40-man roster spots open up once spring training starts too, because Treinen and Buehler can both go on the 60-day, take them off of the 40-man roster at that point, and they can have a little bit more room. But that's my thoughts on Blake Treinen and why it's more likely to happen after spring training starts. And that's overall my thoughts on how Rojas affects the Dodgers' attempts to get under the luxury tax. I think they're still going to try to do it. I'm going to come back in a minute, and I'm going to talk about Jacob Amaya, the prospect the Dodgers traded to the Marlins, and what the Dodgers are losing in him, and why I am still in favor of this trade and think it's a good trade. So thanks again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen, and please keep it Locked On Dodgers. All right, I am back. I want to thank you again for making us your first listen. I apologize again for the late show today. I appreciate you waiting on us and being here with us now that it is out. Let's talk about Jacob Amaya, the Dodgers prospect who they traded to the Marlins for Miguel Rojas. Amaya he's from West Covina. He grew up a Dodger fan. His grandfather played in the Dodgers organization, and then Amaya was drafted by the Dodgers, kind of living the dream. And now he won't get to finish that dream of playing for the Dodgers, at least not right now. But this trade does give him a better chance of living out his dream of being a Major League Baseball player, because in my opinion, I don't think the Dodgers saw Jacob Amaya really as a Major League player, at least not for a team that's trying to win the World Series. For the Marlins are, they're a mediocre team in the same division as the Mets and Braves and Phillies. I don't think the Marlins have huge hopes of making the postseason this year. And so Jacob Amaya, they can afford to put him at shortstop. I wouldn't be surprised if Amaya is their opening day shortstop, and let him have his growing pains, learn and grow, and maybe he becomes a big leaguer. But Amaya was just a decent hitter in the minor leagues. And we've seen guys who hit a lot better than him in the minors come up to the big leagues and struggle. Gavin Lux tore the cover off the ball in the minors. Took him a couple years to figure it out in the big leagues. Miguel Vargas, great hitter last year, one of the best hitters in the minors last year, struggled in his cup of coffee last year with the Dodgers, and we'll see how he does this year. There's so many examples of guys who hit really, really well in the minors and then just don't ever, or don't for a while in the majors. And that's guys who hit well in the minors. Amaya hit okay in the minors. He's not, I just don't think Jacob Amaya is ever going to hit enough to be a true big league starting shortstop. He might start for the Marlins. I don't think he would start for other teams. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if 5 years from now, Amaya is out of the league, or, one of those last spot on the bench kind of guys who comes in for defensive purposes once in a while. And I just think that's kind of his ceiling as a big leaguer. And nothing against him. Everything I've heard about him sounds great as far as his attitude, his work ethic, his baseball IQ, all of that stuff. And maybe that stuff helps him stick on a roster. I hope none of Jacob Amaya's family is listening to this, honestly, because I know as a dad, I would be pretty annoyed if I heard somebody talking about my son that way. And I don't mean it as an insult to Amaya. I just think that's what I see as Amaya. And more importantly, I feel like that's what the Dodgers see in Amaya. They saw a guy who's on the 40-man roster because they had to add him to the roster in 2021 to protect him from a Rule 5 draft that ended up not even happening. He's on the 40-man roster, taking up a spot, and he was never going to be a big league contributor for them, which that's kind of the definition of a guy you trade. And so they traded him. And you don't just give him away, but you get what you can for him. And for me, Rojas or Amaya wasn't a top prospect for the Dodgers. Baseball Prospectus put out their Dodgers prospect list last month. They listed 23 guys. Amaya wasn't on the list. Highest I've ever seen him anywhere is like 15th in the Dodgers system. Realistically, he's somewhere between 15th and 30th probably in the Dodgers system. He's not a guy they're going to miss. He's not a guy, and I think the writing was on the wall this offseason when the Dodgers had a need and an opening at shortstop, and Jacob Amaya was never even really seriously considered. Andrew Friedman paid lip service to the idea one time, but really that was more of a leverage thing in free agency than anything else. Amaya was never really considered. And if you're not going to consider a guy who is, by all accounts, a very good defensive shortstop to play shortstop for you when you need a shortstop, that tells you all you need to know about what the Dodgers think about his offensive potential as a big leaguer. And so if he was never going to contribute to the team, it made sense to trade him. Now, it doesn't necessarily free up a roster spot because Miguel Rojas takes that spot on the 40-man roster, but it frees up a dead spot because Amaya was a dead spot on the 40-man roster. This guy taking up a spot, he's never going to contribute. Rojas has a role on the big league team. We don't know exactly what that role will be yet, but he will be on the big league team. And so that maybe that makes Yonny Hernandez expendable. He's basically the same guy as Rojas, except even a worse hitter and not as good defensively. He's faster, I guess, which would help if he could ever get on base, but he hasn't done that much in the big leagues. So maybe Yonny Hernandez's days are short if the Dodgers need a 40-man roster spot for somebody else. Maybe Hernandez sticks around, but Jacob Amaya wasn't going to contribute, and so there was no point using a 40-man roster spot on him. And Rojas's contract is up after this year, and so that spot frees up after 2023 because of this trade. So that, for me, I've seen a lot of people upset saying that, like, you're trading Amaya for a guy who's the same as Amaya but 10 years older. And the big difference I see is Rojas is a proven big leaguer. He's not an excellent big leaguer. Defensively, he is, but he's proven that he can play offense. He can hit in the big leagues at a 15% below league average level. Jacob Amaya hasn't proven that he can even do that. Defensively, even, Rojas has proven he can play elite shortstop in the big leagues. Amaya hasn't even proven that. And so what you're getting is a proven big leaguer in exchange for an unproven minor leaguer. And that's a trade that makes sense. And I understand people who get attached to prospects, but Jacob Amaya was never going to be a huge deal for the Dodgers. And that's basically what it boils down to. That's about all I have for today. Like I said, this is the third time I've recorded this. I think this is the best of the three, if that helps. We had the Trevor Bauer news to talk about a little bit. On the other two episodes, I talked about, how they still might theoretically could trade Trevor Bauer, which was never going to happen. And I said so. You'll just have to take my word for it because the audio is garbled. But this one's not garbled other than the fact that it's me talking. So thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. It really does mean a lot to us. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. If you're not watching or listening to Locked On Dodgers every day, I'd love if you add 1 or 2 days a month to your rotation. If you have friends or family who love the Dodgers as much as you do, please tell them about the show. If you're listening to this on the podcast and you haven't rated and reviewed us in your podcast app, please do that. Give us 5 stars, tell people how much you like us. And again, we'd love to hear from you in the comments section on YouTube. If that's where you are, you can follow us on Instagram and on Twitter at Locked On Dodgers. Vince is on Twitter at Vince Samperio. I'm on Twitter at Snider, and the DMs are open in all of those places. You can also reach us by email at snidog@gmail.com. What? No, that's my personal email address. Now you know that. Wow. LockedOnDodgers@gmail.com. Or voicemail or text message at 323-863-LOCK 5625. That's not my personal number. That's our number for voicemails or texts. We are here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be here with us when you get in your car or sit on your couch. Tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree. You just have to listen. We'll talk to you tomorrow.